Welcome, Age of Vintage Society. James Mason, career villain, smooth talker, creative powerhouse. He was best known for his urbane characterizations. He was also noted for portraying suave and cerebral aristocrats and scoundrels. Why James Mason had to worry about money for the rest of his life. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you're new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. James Mason the man was complex and enigmatic, a somewhat moody, private and solitary figure who could withdraw into himself or, when comfortable and engaged, be enormously kind and charming. His British reserve prevented many from knowing him fully or understanding his somewhat masochistic relationships with the two women he married. James Mason is amongst a few actors to have reached the top spot in both the United Kingdom and the United States. A dynamic actor and performer, Mason had a very successful career in the film industry. What gave him the edge was the ease with which he played characters of both good and evil intent. While his velvety voice made him pose as a perfect villain, his cultured demeanour and good looks helped him play the role of a hero with elan. Interestingly, Mason's acting career was not an intended and a well-planned one. What actually started as a casual tryst eventually turned into a full-time profession. He started off in Britain as a theatre actor and later took up film roles. After gaining the star status in his homeland, Mason ventured into Hollywood. Unlike the British films, Hollywood flicks were more glamorous and pompous. However, Mason did not let the novelty hamper his performance and accustomed himself to playing different types of characters. If you don't remember the face of this peerless British player, whose film career spanned from the 40s through the 80s, his silky mellifluous voice will surely be familiar. Perhaps most memorably he played suave spy Philip Van Damme, out to steal American secrets and liquidate hero Cary Grant in one of Alfred Hitchcock's most entertaining films, North by Northwest. But this wonderful actor did so much more. Mason was happy to age out of leading man roles, priding himself on being a solid character actor. Revealingly, he once observed, "To be a successful film star, as opposed to a successful film actor, you should settle for an image and polish it forever. I somehow could never quite bring myself to do that." He was born James Neville Mason in Yorkshire, England on May 15, 1909. His father was a successful textile merchant, and young James grew up in a privileged milieu. He eventually attended Marlborough College and Cambridge, with hopes of becoming an architect. The onset of the worldwide depression resulted in a change of plan. Mason calculated that there would be less demand for architects in tough times, and besides, there were plenty of them already. He stood a better chance of being able to support himself with acting jobs. He'd come to his profession of choice the way many others do, by appearing in a play for fun and discovering he enjoyed it and had an aptitude for it. Beyond his natural talent, Mason's dark, striking good looks and beautiful speaking voice were assets he could leverage in this sphere. His performance in a university drama production had won him a good notice from one of the London critics, so he started answering adverts in The Stage and presenting himself for auditions. He made his professional debut in 1931 and reached London's West End 2 years later. He got his first film role in 1935 in one of the quota quickies, churned out to comply with government attempts to develop a homegrown film industry. Mason continued with theatre and firmed his position as a theatre actor. He became popular as a stage actor and starred in a number of theatre shows. Starting from minor roles, he soon found himself large roles in British quota quickies or B pictures. These were mostly minor films that accommodated law mandating a certain percentage of films shows in Britain to be British made. Though he played the role of protagonist in minor films, he had refined his acting talent and developed his position as one of Britain's major film stars of the 1940s. When war broke out, he outraged his family by trying to sign up as a conscientious objector. In the event, he was never a conchi because work in the film industry was deemed to be of national importance. In the early 40s, Mason was cast in several features with Gainsborough Pictures, mostly costume epics, that provided war-weary audiences with a vital dose of escapism. Suddenly he was a star in his native country. By this time he'd married his first wife, Pamela Collino, an aspiring actress from a well-to-do family. His brooding good looks helped to win him parts as wicked seducers, such as the 18th century roué in The Man in Grey, who thrashes Margaret Lockwood with a poker. He hated the role and the image he portrayed, but it proved to be an enormous commercial success. "I have to conclude that my sheer bad temper gave the character colour," he said later. Breaking out of period mode, he also shone as a tyrannical music teacher opposite Anne Todd in The Seventh Veil. It was widely noted that he was every bit as good a villain as a hero. His first big break came when he was hired by the prestigious Old Vic Theatre in London, where he worked under legendary director Tyrone Guthrie. The show business community in England was fairly small back then, and Mason started meeting all the right people, gravitating towards the film world. At 24, he was finally cast in a movie by top producer Alexander Korda, only to be let go a few days into filming. He was undeterred. Having expressed dissatisfaction with the British film industry, he began to make motion pictures in the United States, where he again often found himself at odds with the industry establishment. His memorable voice and good looks aided in his development as an actor, adept in portraying flawed individuals. During the Second World War he registered himself as a conscientious objector. However, his tribunal exempted him only on the requirement to do non-combatant military service. Throughout the 1940s, Mason developed his reputation as an actor. The breakout film that made his name internationally was undoubtedly Carol Reed's superb Odd Man Out. Mason plays a young IRA soldier who gets shot during a robbery and goes on the lam. The actor would cite it as his finest performance years later, and at the first BAFTA ceremony in 1948, Odd Man Out won Best Film. The year 1949 was a big one for Mason, as he made his Hollywood debut with the movie Caught. For the next 4 decades he successfully acted in Hollywood films as well as TV. By this time Mason and Pamela had already moved to Hollywood, a transition which started out badly and hardly improved with time. James had always hated the idea of committing to a long-term contract with a big studio, then still the norm. He happened to meet Paramount producer David Rose and impulsively agreed to sign a multi-picture deal with him. However, it soon became clear that Rose could not deliver the calibre of scripts he wanted, so Mason terminated the agreement. Rose promptly sued. Though Mason ultimately won in court, it stalled the actor's momentum and reinforced the growing perception that this mercurial Brit was difficult. He gradually built up a name for his angst-ridden screen performances. Directors found him initially underwhelming, but said his excellence became apparent when they watched the dailies at the end of each day's filming. His initial antipathy toward Hollywood only increased. Even as he prospered professionally over the next 15 years, James would never feel totally comfortable in Hollywood. He resented the fact that producers and columnists seemed to have all the control, while actors were commoditized. He disliked all the glare and publicity. On the other hand, the beautiful, highly social Pamela adjusted beautifully, throwing lavish, celebrity-filled parties at their house till the wee hours. His home life was as racy as anything he portrayed on the screen, thanks to the efforts of his socialite wife. Most often, James would avoid these, going to bed early with a glass of milk in anticipation of an early morning on set. The Masons had 2 children, son Morgan and daughter Portland. They were routinely described in the press of the day as the world's most precocious children, were also caught up in the party lifestyle. Meanwhile, Pamela began a string of affairs. In Hollywood, she adapted with gusto to life in Buster Keaton's former mansion, throwing fabulous parties every night. She was such a good-time girl that she was once described as having been vaccinated with a phonograph needle. Mason seemed more taken with looking after the large number of pet cats the two of them had amassed, and he was known throughout his life as a devoted owner of pet animals. Their 23-year marriage finally ended in 1964, with Pamela coming out on top in the divorce settlement. Fortuitously, she had hired a sharp young lawyer named Marvin Mitchelson, who won her a $2 million settlement, an unheard-of sum for the time. Mason was virtually cleaned out and for the rest of his life worried about money. Mason's talent for playing protagonists of a decidedly hard-bitten or melancholy stripe brought him from these minor films to a position as one of Britain's major film stars of the 1940s. When, late in that decade, he came to America, he played somewhat more glamorous or heroic roles than he had been accustomed to in Britain, but he remained a dynamic and intelligent force on the screen. His tendency to take any job offered led him to have many unworthy credits on his resume, but throughout his career he remained a respected and powerful figure in the industry. His mellifluous voice and an uncanny ability to suggest rampant emotion beneath a face of absolute calm made him a fascinating performer to watch. His breakthrough came in 1954 with the film A Star is Born. It won him Golden Globe Award and Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. Many reviewers considered his performance opposite Judy Garland in that film the best of his career. Mason finally left Hollywood, relocating to Europe. Over the next 2 decades he took nearly every job offered to him, again due to his urgent ongoing need for cash. The result was some regrettable appearances in schlocky movies completely unworthy of his talent, like 1971's Bad Man's River and most notoriously 1975's Mandingo. Mason married Australian actress Clarissa Kay in 1971, and that union endured till his death. By most accounts a fiery, difficult, strong-willed woman, she used her husband to advance her own stalled career, insisting that she'd be given parts in many of his films. This requirement was, in fact, written into many of his contracts. The ugliness chimes somehow with the streak of darkness that this melancholy actor brought to every role, and with the sadness that haunted his gilded life. "I suppose you could say I've made a tremendous professional mess of my life," he once said. "Every man has a grand idea of self-fulfillment, which inevitably he then falls short of." James Mason finally settled in Switzerland, where he found the peace and privacy that had always eluded him. He must have wondered to himself why he'd stayed in Hollywood so long. Mason had left his entire estate to Clarissa, with the understanding that it would go to his children on her death. However, relations with her stepchildren grew so poisonous that she decided instead to leave his fortune to a trust benefiting an obscure Indian sect. Mason was a wine enthusiast and liked nothing more than to discuss and taste the year's growths with the local wine growers in their cellars. To commemorate the relationship, a special limited James Mason edition bottling of the famed Corso white wine has now been produced with a label bearing the actor's self-portrait. The unveiling of the bust will be followed by a buffet and wine reception in the LBT Cellar Theatre, where guests will be able to toast the memory of this movie legend with the specially imported James Mason Vintage Corso wine. Mason had a glittering stage and film career spanning 55 years, first in England and then in Hollywood and Europe. In more than 100 films over nearly half a century, the actor with a resonant touch of Yorkshire voice effectively played a wide range of roles, often as a romantic villain who brutalises the leading lady. He alternated those roles with characterisations of good men with damaging or fatal flaws. He died of a heart attack in 1984 at his home in Switzerland. He was 75 years old. She also hid Mason's ashes in a Geneva bank vault, and his kids had to sue to recover them. Ultimately, the actor's remains were buried on a scenic Swiss hillside close to his good friend and neighbour, Charlie Chaplin. He may well have been one of those performers who felt happiest playing someone else. It goes without saying that we were extremely happy to watch him do just that. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of James Mason? Mason's uniqueness and versatility were his greatest assets, and served him well throughout his career, particularly when he aged into being one of the finest character players in cinema.